Okay, today we have Max, who is the general manager at 8020. Welcome to the show, Max.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing? Do you want to just give us a quick intro about who you are and what 8020 is slash does?
Yeah. Like you said, I'm Max from 8020. I actually live and work from remotely from Iowa. In 8020, we know pretty simply we describe ourselves as a global no code agency who helps great companies move faster without code. Uh, that can obviously mean a lot of things, but we try to keep that pretty simple, just simply by for the fact of kind of reeling the clients in terms of like what we could potentially do.
Fair enough. Yeah. So Andrew Wilkinson, who is an investor in MakerPad, is known for buying lots of businesses or buying majority shares and then spinning them up and letting them run and things like that. And it seems like 8020 was very much born in that way. Like it was created from the tiny team and brought you in. Am I getting that right? What happened
Yeah,
there?
yeah, exactly. So and I should have actually kind of noted this too. I've actually worked for Andrew in a couple other of his tiny properties in the past. Managed the community at Designer News for a while, and worked at Dribble for a while. And just over the years, he's obviously been a big fan of sort of like the no code movement and visual development, and especially using tools like Webflow to build projects. So he had always kind of talked about starting another agency solely focused on projects where where they're using those tools specifically. So just more recently, really just had a bigger push to make it happen. And yeah, to your point, he kind of casually sent me a text and said, "Hey, I'm starting this thing. Would you be interested?" And that kind of led to further conversations, and kind of here we are. So yeah, it's interesting too, because obviously from their perspective, to your point, Tiny's got a number of companies under the Tiny umbrella with some overlapping services. So it's really interesting from our perspective too, that despite being an agency that you know is really focused on like the smaller to medium sized businesses, we do a lot of cross collaboration work with other companies within the Tiny umbrella, working with sometimes on you know bigger projects with MetaLab, for instance, who's like a well-renowned agency who works on very, very big projects. So yeah, it's interesting to say the least, the kind of crossover collaboration that actually does even happen under the Tiny umbrella.
Yeah, for sure. How many people are at the 8020 side of things now?
So we're essentially at 5 now, and then so 5 on our home team, quote unquote, and then we have a number of folks that we work with in our away team, I like to call them. So contractors that have worked with us on a number of projects and worked with Tiny on a number of projects that really kind of help us. And this obviously kind of gets a little bit more into who we are as an agency, but a number of folks on the away team that really help us build projects in a wider variety of tools too. Obviously you're certainly it's certainly no secret on your end to understand the wide variety of tools that exist in the no code world. So yeah, we're a small and nimble team, but at the same time, we have a pretty broad reach just by kind of the combination of our home and away teams.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it's interesting because I've always been interested in like the agency model and how people deal with. I did a small no code agency before MegaPad was born, if you can call it that. I guess it was like we'll just get people in and then we design stuff and built stuff in Bubble for them. But it was more just like client based stuff, and I was not like that wasn't an enjoyable experience for me. And I feel like that was because that was like it was I needed to do it. I needed to like just have clients to get me through and pay the bills and stuff. But I feel like if there must be something that I'm missing around the agency side around why people start agencies and how people run them. So I find it interesting that you say about the home and away team. Like I'm assuming, without you saying anything, is the home team sort of manages what comes in, what's right, how the fit is, and then says, okay, right, here's the 3 or 4 away players who will tackle this for you, and then you manage the project, I assume?
Yeah, that's a good way to kind of put it, especially knowing, I think at the end of the day, a lot of times we'll have potential projects come our way or clients come our way where, it sounds kind of silly to say, but they just want to be able to trust somebody to get something done. And obviously that's kind of the point of agencies in general, is like, you would go to an agency because maybe they can do everything from design to build to copywriting work to marketing growth work to you name it. So yeah, so I feel like, and maybe this is also something that we kind of need to really, nail down internally in terms of how we pitch this. But part of our extreme value to the client is a matchmaking service of sorts. To your point, we're able to find exactly who you need for the job to make it work. No discredit to any existing agencies that kind of use the traditional model, but when you think about it, there's a lot of times where a project might come in. Maybe a traditional agency has 10 people that could work on that project. Well, maybe say seven of them are currently booked with projects, so there's only 3 left. And out of those 3, maybe they don't have the specialty needed for that project that just came in, but they're the only ones available. So it's kind of and that obviously that's a very specific use case, but I feel like, again, this sort of like matchmaking, I'm not even sure that's the best way to put it, but matchmaking skill set is sort of one of our, kind of not well broadcast skill sets that we actually provide. But at the end of the day, again, it's just like clients want to come to us because they trust that we'll make it happen, and we'll make it happen quick, and hopefully for a far smaller budget than what would happen if they went to a traditional agency.
Yeah, so I think, like you said, matchmaking, it's not something you really talk about, and you said, I don't know if it's the best term. I think for me, it seems like the matchmaking term is almost like undervalued from anyone, because you would think of traditional thing of like Tinder, you swipe, and then you get matched if you're lucky. And then
Sure.
that's like the simplest version of a matchmaking thing, right? Where someone has similar interests or something, and it's like, oh, that's really easy, so that's not a valuable thing. But actually, you then see it with companies, even companies like TripleByte, for example, where they vet people in their own way, and that's the value, is that they tell you, no, these are the people that we've said are at this level. So I think matchmaking does sort of undersell it, I guess, where it's like, no, we've like picked from the best, and we made sure that this is the right thing, and it's like, that's a professional service in my mind.
Yeah. I personally had just talked about on Twitter, really thinking that, manually curated directories are like highly undervalued. Just that could be a lot of things, like the one that always comes to mind that I think is like a wire cutter. If I want to buy a vacuum, I was like, there's a million vacuums. I just want to know like what's the best or the most reasonably priced or whatever. So kind of doing that same thing, to your point, in our world, a lot of folks, that come our way, they like, because again, they trust us. And part of our pitch too is like trying to work backwards. So right from the get-go, we'll talk about like, timeline and budget and those things that like might get pushed off, down the road a little bit with other agencies, because what we try to do is say, okay, we're not trying to see how much money we can make. We're just trying to frame you into, like a good, better, or best scenario. Meaning, there's a large number of tools that we could probably use to build your thing. Now, trying to understand like how much, what your budget is, what your requirements are. Those sorts of like high level questions can hopefully kind of, lead us down a path to pretty quickly get an understanding of what we could use to build your thing. And that kind of sound like, for some folks that aren't too familiar with the no code world, that might sound kind of weird or scary, but it's the reality is like you could go 100 different ways. It's, not to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I don't know if I read this somewhere, just randomly came up with it, but like this idea of, thinking of no code like pizza, everybody has their own take or preference, or like there's geographical recipes, whatever, but like at the end of the day, we still call it pizza. So figuring out how to build something using no code tools. It's kind of depends on your preference and your ingredients and your take on pizza. And that sounds really silly, but I think it's like a good analogy too, to get people to understand, like at the end of the day, you're still building the thing.
Yeah.
For a lot of folks, like what is happening behind the scenes doesn't matter as much, as long as it's looks great and it's easy to use and functions as it should.
Yeah, and with that, there's all the small pieces that's like, okay, we can build this version of this thing that you're doing in this way, and that'll be like the good enough sort of piece.
Yeah.
But we could go down a different route, which will take us another 2 weeks, that actually like incorporates all these other things, but it's a bit bigger, it's a bit heavier to maintain. There's a bit more things going on, but it's like maybe the ultimate scenario, but maybe you start with that. Like, and yeah, there's so many tools that packaged together in different ways can do different things. So yeah, it's just nice. I think so. It's so many people want to know, like you said, the Wirecutter example of what's the best thing, or like you tell me. And I think this is why there was a tweet going around recently about why do people tweet a question where they could just Google it. And I think the point isn't that, because I don't trust Google to give me the best answer anymore.
Right.
I think that I assume my followers, people in my circle, they're the ones who are going to tell me, oh yeah, this is like, I'm similar interest to you, I think similarly to you, and this is what I found was the best version of this thing. So I'm like, okay, I trust that over the 15th Google ad I'm scrolling past. So
yeah, exactly. And back to the point of relying some folks in our ROA team, there's a large community of really talented folks that want to just get into the designing and the building of these things, and like I call them dabblers, folks that just like want to try all the tools to kind of figure out what they like the best and how they could use things. And obviously over time, this is, some tools might get weeded out, or there might be some consolidation. But to your point, I totally agree. That's why I think us relying on our ROA team to some extent makes a lot of sense, because it's also like when it comes down to it, learning all these tools and understanding how they could work to their fullest potential is like a full-time job in of itself for a lot of people. I mean, again, yeah, I'm totally preaching to the choir here, but it's so to that extent, I totally agree. Being able to lean on the community more so, and then in our case, being able to provide some folks on our ROA team with some hopefully really cool, really interesting projects, and some great value, budget wise back in their pocket, is hopefully really a big part of people wanting to work with us on the consultant side of the equation, as compared to the client side of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people just don't want to have to deal with that, and I think it's a valuable piece in itself. Yeah, and there are so many tools. I mean, I again mentioned on Twitter recently that the community probably can build stuff no code better than I can, whether that's because they know different tools, or because I only know, like, I'm this good at this many tools, but there's so many and new ones coming up every day. So it's more than a full-time job. You definitely can't keep up with all of them.
Right.
We try, and that's why we have a big community doing that for us as well. So that helps with all of that stuff too. Do you use in running an agency with all these other moving parts and other people, do you have like a bunch of no-code workflows internally that you say, like, this is how we run our agency, and it's like automated to 80% or whatever?
Yeah, we do. I do. I say it that way because I also kind of caveat it as like, we could always, make things run smoother. We actually, just personally and at the agency, we're big fans of Notion for a variety of reasons. So we rely on Notion for a whole host of things, both like behind the scenes and client facing. Notion obviously doesn't quite have an API ready to kind of connect the dots. This is maybe a subtle plug to hopefully that'll be soon. But so a lot of our things currently are still a little manual. Now that sounds kind of strange, obviously, for what we're preaching, but really a lot of what we're also doing is not getting too set in stone with like how our workflow is happening behind the scenes. with a small team, it's easy enough to pivot as needed. I feel like we have kind of pivoted a little bit a couple times already, but yeah, we do rely. So again, we rely on Notion for a whole host of things just to operate the agency specifically. But then I think even just the ability, like as a quick example, like, once the project gets signed, we'll quickly spin up a Notion page that from a template that we already have created that exists to share with the client right away, that talks about like, okay, here's the deliverables, here's the timelines, here's like where things will be, just kind of creating like a project wiki of sorts, like a single source of truth, just as things go along. I would argue like that in of itself, to be able to quickly turn that page to public and then share it with the client and then have them be able to edit it, is pretty powerful in of itself, just because, prior to that, you're exchanging hundreds of emails back and forth and things are getting lost. And obviously everybody has their own kind of system, but I think, the route that we're going is also part of our pitch in terms of, we're going to try to make things simpler for you, both in terms of like what we're building and designing, but also just in terms of like how this process goes along. Like part of I would say part of probably most agencies' issues with projects taking a long time or hurdles that they run into is just, a lot of things come down to like communication too, like remembering what the requirements actually were, or weird, projects going over scope, or just questions being unanswered because they're not organized correctly. So, despite us not having a lot of automated workflows happening behind the scenes, I feel like we have a pretty good sense of an organized workflow, I guess, if that makes sense. So really on our end, automating a lot of these things is sort of like step 2 for us.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, I think we're all waiting for that Notion API. So does the home team, are they the sort of the ones that talk to the clients and then do a loop back with the away team and have that as the like mode of communication? Is that one person or two people, whatever?
It's a little bit of both. To be honest, I say away team as if, they're not truly part of the 80/20 team, but really, I would say the majority of our projects, after we get things going, we really want to pretty quickly let the client and the consultant, talk directly. We're involved with, project management and quality control and ensuring the requirements are set. And like, from the consultant's perspective, we're trying to make their lives easier by just like letting them jump in and do the thing that they're great at. And then from the client's perspective, we're just trying to make sure like, hey, yep, we're going to make sure that, you get what you paid for and what you asked for. So, again, I think there's a lot of agencies that kind of like to hide behind that curtain and say like, yep, like this is all us. And if you pulled it back, you'd realize there's all kinds of other things going on and other people involved. I would say we're pretty transparent and pretty clear about like how we function and how we work, which, from my standpoint, I think is really important. And I think will be like a bigger piece of, how agencies evolve and how the broader no code movement plays a part, in terms of like folks realizing that, having this big community and being open about folks we work with is actually, much more important for the movement, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. How do you think like a traditional agency versus a no-code agency? I mean, there's so many questions around this whole piece. I guess first would be, we see loads of people come in for our business tiers and say, I want to build this project. And it could be anything from, okay, I've got a budget of $100 to like $50,000. And that's not what our business tier is about. But we always have people saying about those things. Do you think that there's a challenge in trying to teach people what no code is and what it's for and like what the right scenarios are? And is this more for building projects or is it for more established teams trying to spin up something new? Or what do you see on your side?
It's an interesting question because we've definitely seen a little bit of both. We've had some big high profile clients come in, like we we took the MetaLab website and migrated that over to Webflow. We abstract.com. We took their WordPress website and migrated it over to Webflow in partnership with FinSuite on that one. There's some cases where folks just want to migrate to something like Webflow because of ease of use or a whole host of other reasons. Now, like, is that our sweet spot, quote unquote, for an 80-20 project? Maybe. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things going on. I feel like we're probably better off with folks that maybe have tried a first stab at something on their own, or like they have something that exists but it's not quite right, and they're like, you think of like the skateboard, bike, car kind of analogy of growing a product, like folks that are maybe in between the skateboard and bike phase. It's like they know they want something better. They're not exactly sure how to get there. They probably have gotten to the point where they realize they got to lean on somebody else to make it happen because, like in a lot of cases, time is money, and what they need to be working on is the product or service itself as compared to the website or the app that makes the thing happen. So, yeah, it's interesting for us. I would say, at least right now, most of our target clients or target projects are those that are kind of like like in between the skateboard and the bike in terms of size. It's folks that also want to like get that first thing out there, or that maybe not first thing, but that first thing from us out there, and then iterate on it over time. So rather than spending 6 months on the entire project, let's get the first kind of few pages of the website up and running, and then like over time, let's add additional components and iterate on it. Which again, I guess from my perspective, is probably part of the benefit of going the no-code route, because then you're not so worried about like thinking through every single scenario up front and how it gets built, but you can kind of like start and then test it out and see what happens, see how people react to it. And then if you need to backtrack a little bit, that's okay. Like there's, you have the ability to do so, but then at least you're kind of like building momentum. I feel like that's probably one of the biggest things that people kind of take for granted in the no code versus code, or whatever, which is kind of silly in of itself. But just the idea of like, if nothing else, at least kind of going the no code route, whatever that means to you, you're able to kind of build momentum and make the thing happen.
Yeah. So do you think that do you find yourself having to teach people the benefits of no code and doing that pitch piece first, rather than say, or do they come knowing what no code is and just saying, yeah, can you build this thing for me?
It's probably like 50-50. There are some folks that have heard our name or have heard us on a podcast or whatever, and they hear, no code, fraction of the time, less expensive, and they think, oh, awesome, so I can build like, the next whatever Airbnb for $1,000. And it's like, well, not exactly, but then we have to kind of talk them through those options and the good, better, best kind of philosophy. And then I would say that, the other 50% of the audience definitely knows enough to be dangerous about like what no code is to some extent, or the tools and the options. In either scenario, there's still a lot of kind of consulting or coaching going involved in terms of just trying to sort of backtrack to get both our team and their team to understand like what are they truly trying to get out of this. They might say, I need a new website. Well, it's like, well, there's great, but like what else is there? Like, is it a matter of like, you want more leads? Do you want, are you trying to make something else happen behind the scenes that you think the website isn't fulfilling, but you realize it's not the website at all, it's how the form works or something. So yeah, it's interesting too, because I would say which maybe is the way for most agencies, but from our perspective, it's never a dull moment in terms of like the types of requests that we get. Yeah. Because again, like we just say, help companies move faster without code, which could mean, we could be working on websites or web apps or mobile apps or dashboards, or just behind the scenes, workflow pieces using, those those like kind of like automation workflow tools. But yeah, it's definitely an never a dull moment around here.
You think that like for those that sort of know about the no code piece, you mentioned about, oh, I've heard that it's cheaper to do this thing, and I don't have to hire developers. It's perfect. I can, like I say, get this. What's the thing? Do they just come in assuming a tenth of the price, a tenth of the time, like? And why is this going to cost me $10,000 versus $100 or whatever it is?
Yeah. There's definitely some folks again that sort of just assume that it's, you know, like the bare bones costs. So we'll have to kind of just get them to be realistic about expectations. I feel like as part of our pitch too, along with, you know, talking about like timeline and pricing up front, to sort of help work backwards to figure out where, you know, what they could build. We also try to talk right away about like potential tools that they could use, which, you know, again, maybe some agencies don't go that route because they want to get the project signed and then like start building and then, you know, go that route because maybe they're worried that the client would just, if I said, oh, you could build this in Webflow and here's how, the client might just run away and do it. Well, what we're trying to do is obviously, you know, build trust with the client and say, hey, like here's what you could build for that price and that timeline, and we would probably use these tools. And then, you know, at the end of the day, they obviously want to just lean on us, you know, because of their trust and our expertise and all that good stuff. But yeah, you know, I guess in terms of thinking about like just on a quick side tangent, like thinking about the tools themselves, we try pretty hard to, like, going back to this good, better, best analogy, like we tried pretty hard to, on our end, sort of templatize some of the scenarios that people could come to us with.
Yeah.
Which isn't like, we're not saying like, oh, you fit in this one specifically and it costs $10,000, but it's, you know, it's us trying to at least keep the ball rolling and like, you know, not try to think of every single project as something that we have to rescope and take, you know, 2 hours to dig through like all the finer details and requirements. But again, I think the benefit there to the client then is like, we've already thought about, you know, we'll have a lot of conversations where somebody will ask about X and I'll say, oh, actually, we like literally just did this project, or we just did one that's really similar and we're pitching it now. And here's the costs and all that good stuff. So the nice thing there is, you know, in a lot of those cases, if we've already done it and we've already gone through the project once, we already know the good, bad, and the otherwise. And hopefully in some cases we're able to say, oh, actually, yeah, we can be a little bit more cost effective here too, because we found a better way to build it, you know, as compared to the first time around.
Yeah. Do you think people also are? This is one question I tweeted earlier and said, if people have questions for you, what should I ask you? And I'm not going to ask anything horrible. But one of them was, yeah, what are some projects you've had to say no to because no code wasn't the right stack? Or like, I mean, we see this a lot where even building MakerPad internally, it's like you do hit limits, and I'm not pretending that no code does everything. Like, that's not what the point. It's not the point of this a whole movement, quote unquote.
Right.
Yeah, it's like the other side, which we can go down later. But yeah, I think it's important to say that, yeah, not everything is no code. But I wonder what you've seen and had to say, look, this scope is a bit too unrealistic here.
Yeah, you know, again, there's some that obviously just like maybe great ideas, but the budget isn't quite right.
Yeah,
and that's just simply just, you know, it's things take time too. We have had some that you know, clients come to us with a great idea. You know, maybe it's like a CRM for some very specific niche, and then, you know, as we get into it, they have enough requests and things that, you know, kind of are add-ons to their CRM idea that we kind of get to the point where it's like, well, I guess what are you missing out of like the whole host of CRMs that currently exist that you're not getting? And not to say like we wouldn't do some of those projects, but just, you know, there are some times where we realize like, hey, like, you know, what you're trying to build, again, for maybe the budget you have, but what you're trying to build probably exists to some extent already. You know, is it possible for us to like, or is it possible for you to use this third-party CRM, but for some of those other add-on features that you're asking about that the CRM doesn't have, can we build again, those behind the scenes workflow automations or some of those things. So like there have been a couple projects where, you know, we don't want the client to recreate the wheel, so to speak, if the project is almost like an identical representation of something that already exists. Now that sounds kind of weird, because that's part of the premise of no code too, is like, well, you can just build your own hyper local version of Airbnb. But if you're doing that, then you're probably doing it, you know, you're probably doing it much simpler with maybe some slightly different features and some slightly different, you know, a setup of scenario for the target audience at the end of the day. But I feel like most of the projects that we have passed on, or we just have lost out on, are either, you know, the budget wasn't quite right, or again, they're trying to build something that's way too identical to something that already exists, that doesn't it's not a rethinking of that existing service.
And yeah, is that usually like a piece of software, like you said about CRM? It's like, I'm trying to build my own piece of software to do this thing, rather than something like Airbnb. The mechanics are basically, they're quite straightforward when you break it down into like a marketplace, views and stuff. But then if it's like, I'm trying to build a software system for me, people who are like me. So maybe, yeah, it's like, well, you could use Copper or Airtable and just add these pieces on that would get you there. So maybe we focus on that piece.
Yeah, on that note specifically, I feel like that's, you know, amongst of other things that we're currently like kind of challenged with. I feel like that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is when folks do come to us with some of these ideas. And again, we're trying to work backwards to figure out how it fits with all their requirements and budget and all that good stuff. But also trying to get really to the crux of the problem itself. Like, why do they want to build that thing? You know, if it is a software, you know, or software as a service or whatever it might be, is it like they just want to build the thing to make money, or is it they're trying to build the thing to like help their own company internally, you know, have better workflows, or is it something else entirely? Because I think then we might approach a project, you know, completely different too. You know, it's like we just helped launch a project that's essentially, it's called Commish. It's basically just like, you know, like a marketplace to buy commissioned work. So to your point, like you know, Fiverr or a marketplace like that already exists. But what Commish is trying to do is be like hyper focused on a very specific subset of a market. So it's folks that, you know, maybe I want like a new Twitter avatar, and I want to find somebody to you know, do a digital watercolor version of it or something. Like, I would go to Commish for that. And again, that sounds like very specific as compared to, I could probably go to Fiverr and do the same request, but hopefully, because Commish is, you know, their target audience is much smaller and the pitch is like much tighter, even though it's like more or less the same idea as a Fiverr or the like. That was a very interesting project because they are trying to get so hyper targeted and hyper focused. So it's interesting. Maybe I've kind of talked myself in a circle a little bit with some of our challenges and some of our solutions, but I mean, to be honest, I think that's also, you know, kind of part of the challenge for everybody in terms of trying to figure out what makes the most sense, you know, going the no code route.
Yes, I mean, it's not rigid. It's not black or white. It's not a sort of yes or no thing every single time. And there's always like the subtle things that you think, oh, we just want user profiles that do this, that, and the other. You're like, it sounds like a reasonable request, but actually that adds loads of complexity. So if you were building it with a certain tool, you're not going to get very far with this user profile piece. So you'd have to remap everything or refigure that out. But do you find it difficult then? You're almost like the startup guru in that scenario, where people are coming to you with like, okay, this is my project, and this is what I want to build. And you could be like, oh, well, that kind of exists with this thing. So it's I imagine really tough scenario to try and navigate and like not crush anyone's dreams for saying, just to be like realistic. But I really think that's probably something that not a lot of agencies pride themselves on is, hey, look, we're trying to actually get you to your goal. That's our goal, is like to get you to your success point. And it's not about you spending the most amount of money to rebuild this whole thing, which is actually there. But like, we can probably help you get this really a lot quicker, a lot easier, a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
I think that's a good selling point.
Yeah. On that point specifically, I feel like a lot of the problem that, most agencies are trying to solve is like the what, like what are you trying to build? And then, we can design and build it, but we're trying to really push to solve the why, like, why are you trying to build this thing in the first place, to work backwards and then hopefully figure out, can we actually build that thing? Or, is there some other tangential project or idea that we need to actually help push on? Because to your point, I certainly wouldn't consider ourselves like consultants by any means, but there is definitely a lot of coaching that goes involved too, to your point, with like, folks come to us with an idea, and then we kind of either have to help them, make that a reality, or not crush their dreams, but just kind of get them to realize that, like, hey, maybe you just need to like reposition yourself a little bit here, which again, like from our perspective in terms of taking on those projects is a fun, interesting challenge too, because, a lot of times there's, because of the projects that we have worked on and the tools, and realizing like the potential to some extent of the broader no code, set of tools and services, which certainly like you and your team, you have some insights in terms of like what could be done, which is almost just as exciting as like what you literally build. So that's also why a lot of times we're just, again, we pitch this, we have the pitch of helping companies move faster without code, because it's like, what that means exactly is sort of like that gray area that you talked about, but that's also the exciting part for us.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. Is like you actually can do almost anything you're thinking of, probably in this.
Yeah.
So
right.
Yeah, I didn't mean to talk so much about the agency business, but I found like just the way you're thinking about the projects and how to think about building, and hopefully that's helpful for people listening to when they're thinking of building their own projects or coming to you and trying to get that built. It's quite a helpful framework, I think. And I think when you start building without code, you almost develop that framework yourself and realize, okay, it's easier than writing functions in a terminal, but it's not like, okay, you can just literally just copy paste launch. It's not quite that easy. So it's nice to see that point of view. What are mention some of the challenges that you're thinking about? What are some of the other challenges that you're facing as an agency? And maybe like we can talk then about the wider no code movement and where we see that going, and maybe where that presents more opportunities, more challenges for everyone.
Sure. Yeah. That, on the agency side of things, I would say our biggest challenge currently is which is probably like most, is like, how do you, I hate to use the word scale, but how do you grow the business so that it makes sense, for taking on more projects and, finding more folks for the home team and the away team, like the founder's dilemma, or, everybody runs into this problem. Obviously the benefit for us is hopefully by, using a lot of these no code tools that, like we're able to kind of take things that were typically much harder in the past and make them a lot easier because of behind the scenes workflows and automations and all that good stuff. So I would say at least right now, that's probably our, kind of biggest hurdle. And on top of that, we've gotten a large number of inbound requests, for folks that want projects to be done. And, as any agency would tell you, or any freelancer would tell you, like a big piece of the pie is obviously like scoping the project and getting to realize like how much time it might take and understand your requirements. Like that stuff just takes time. Like there's not like an easy way, quote unquote, to automate that too. So I think for us, trying to sort of work backwards and, like it, which is kind of interesting too. So trying to work backwards and sort of like match to our name, 80-20, the name, it comes up is the idea of obviously getting you 80% of the way there for 20% of the effort. So there's probably something there too about some of the questions that we ask early on, or some of the things that we kind of get from the client to pretty quickly realize if it's something we can or can't do. And basically hopefully just, kind of refining that, that initial scoping phase over time to really help both us and the client grow.
Yeah. And what about for the wider no code world, just just businesses and professionals, everyone in general. I think for us, there's a lot of trying to teach people what's possible, and they don't know what they don't know until it's put in front of their face to say, look, even if you work in sales and you've got sales processes, these are things you can do. Like, it doesn't have to be an Airbnb clone. It doesn't have to be like a new, like an entrepreneur. You can be creative or have that sort of maker mindset to an extent, but it doesn't need to be that process necessarily every time. And that's one thing I'm thinking of. We see lots of, we've got 1,500 members, and MakerPad is almost like a credentialing system for these no-coders. When they get to a certain point, I think in no-code in general, you sort of graduate where you know how to build stuff with your little tool stack and you figure out these ways. There's always this question of an expert marketplace, or like us doing a matchmaking system or something on that piece. But do you think that the market needs to be there before that? I mean, I think I see a lot of agencies or people saying they're a no-code agency or everyone seems to be busy. So I don't know whether it's like, is it through like just the way they market themselves or get it out there, or is it like the market is listening and like it could be the right time for these expert marketplaces to be up and running and people be there for it?
Yeah, I would say being pretty darn humble about our situation, being attached to the Tiny family and Andrew and we were 80/20 is obviously in a position that we're able to get some really interesting projects come in the door because of being attached to those things. Obviously on top of that, just pitching ourselves as a no-code agency is just hopefully not trying to say like we're the first to do it, but it's really just trying to say, hey, like we're another one that is part of this community that's really trying to push this along. It's the whole rising tide lifts all boats kind of analogy. So obviously what you're doing really benefits us. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing, because we want to find the next wave of folks to join our team, the home team and the away team and all that good stuff. I do feel like, just more generally speaking, the interesting thing about folks that want like an abstract that came to us and wants to migrate from a WordPress to a Webflow. Obviously they're a much bigger client. They're obviously have a lot of challenges that they're trying to face. I think for a lot of folks, and smaller folks and somebody like abstract, a lot of it might just come down to like, once this thing is live, whatever that means, can I tinker with it? Like the idea of like being able to play in the sandbox. Like, nobody wants the feeling of you built this thing and then now, it's essentially just a black box that, only one person with one key can actually use. So out of everything that's happening with the movement and projects that we're working on, we're pretty adamant about saying like, whatever your current situation is, you might be frustrated, things are expensive or projects take time or whatever. Like, we want you to walk away with something that's really well designed. Like we definitely have a quality bar that we kind of set for ourselves internally, but then like we want to deliver a project or a product that you can tweak and maintain yourself over time and like kind of become your own expert. Like we'll definitely be here if you need help and you need to kind of upgrade, but like I feel like a huge part of, just making the no code movement or whatever it turns out to be, maybe in a few years, it's not necessarily no code, but there's some other term that's used, but like this movement of putting the power back in the hands of the people that are using the product. I'm pretty sure that MakerPad says something about this as well, but I really like, so AJ at Card, the way that he sort of describes like the best thing about no code. I'll kind of paraphrase the quote a little bit, but it's not so much about like the no code piece of it, but rather like just dismantling the BS notion that making stuff is actively reserved for only very serious developers. Yeah. Which we totally believe. It's just like, if you give everybody the tools and the training and whatever to play in the sandbox, and then over time build really cool, interesting things, and then give them, the power, whatever that means. That could be really big projects, or it could be just something really small that you use on a personal level, but like giving them the ability and the tools to, make those things happen. I think that's the exciting thing from my perspective. I'm like a staunch advocate and fan of everything Apple, and they're huge. Obviously they're really big on, everybody can code and getting kids involved early on. Like that's awesome. I also think there's probably a huge piece of that coding, it again, like in 2 to 3 years is really just probably more so building, and building is the no code, movement. So it's like, there's a bigger gray area of ambiguity happening there, which again, from my perspective is really exciting, because it's way more about like what you can do and playing in that sandbox than, to your point, typing commands and functions in a terminal.
Yeah, I totally with you. I think it's almost like different levels of building. So I want to build stuff to a level of whatever that is, but then if I'm trying to push this, I'll use the user profile example again. Like some bits to touch, to copy and paste code, also God forbid, and like tweak it or just do like a patch request. I have to do certain things where I'm touching APIs. But that makes me figure out what API does and how that thing links to that thing. Like touching the pieces that actually just happen. But I'm already at a point where I'm building far more than I ever could do if I was just learning these commands, functions, and stuff. Like it's an enabler of software development. So it just depends on you, the technical software developer, or the non-technical software developer. So I hope this throws in a new code, hopefully changes it, or something happens here, and people keep asking me to come up with something, but I can't quite put my finger on it because I just don't know it. It feels like software development is that, but it's yes, non-technical side.
Yeah, I love analogies. There's probably a better analogy, but I've been thinking about this too lately. It's like, folks that drink beer, which is a huge pool of people, and there's folks that make beer, and then like there's kind of like this in between, like folks that sort of dabble and do it on their own and in their garage or whatever. But then just by proxy of being a beer drinker, you might really appreciate it over time and get very, very in tune with like wanting to understand the behind the scenes. So like there's all these like smaller microbreweries, popping up that do really interesting things. And the cool thing there related to the no code world is like those microbreweries, despite them being much smaller and maybe have a smaller distribution scale and all that, are still doing really cool, interesting things. And maybe, the brewery here in Iowa that I really like, Single Speed, if anybody's wondering, Single Speed Brewing, is slowly growing over time and like growing their distribution, but also just, kind of started on the smaller scale. But it was mainly just because they were interested in making beer, because prior to that, they were just interested in drinking beer. So there's probably a lot of like similarities there that, again, I think is really interesting about the broader no code movement and the, kind of like this team that it's picking up, because it's way more about just dabbling and playing in the sandbox and figuring out what you can build or can do, whatever that thing actually is.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy actually, and I think I used to say when something about cooking and eating food and knowing to cook the food or make it or being like a different level of chef or something. I can't quite remember how I put it, so I'm trying to fix that now. But that's been awesome having you on. We've got a bit of a time and I've learned this conversation, so yeah, I appreciate you tell the folks where they can find you and be there.
Sure. Well, so you can find 8020 online at 8020.inc, or on Twitter, we are 8020, so definitely feel free to reach out to us if you have any project, big or small, or you just want to talk no code or anything. Definitely reach out to us. I'm also on Twitter at Max Lind. Same thing. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll leave you with this. My background is in design. I've obviously had a number of roles in sales and marketing and kind of all over the place. I describe myself as a generalist, kind of a connector of dots sort of person. I'm a really big advocate of just send that email. Meaning, if you have a question, you have an idea, you have whatever, like regardless to who the person that you're sending it to, just send it. A long time ago, I sent an email to Andrew Wilkinson about congratulating him for purchasing Designer News, and said, keep up the good work. I love the community. Here's a number of ideas I've been thinking about as a member of the community. Kudos. Well, that turned into him randomly following up and saying, hey, do you want to try to execute on these things and make it a reality? So I just say that as in, definitely reach out to me, on Twitter, or us on Twitter, or on the website. And just don't be afraid to reach out, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're not going to hear back, or it could turn into, a project or a job or a friendship or whatever it might be.
So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. It's been great. Let's have you on. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Sounds great.